The stars burned cold and distant above the broken world of Vethara Prime. Captain Marcus Cole stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the valley below. Smoke rose from 100 fires. Bodies of the enemy lay scattered across the battlefield like dark leaves after a storm. The war had lasted 3 years, but today it had finally ended. Marcus was tired. His armor was cracked in a dozen places. Blood from a wound on his forehead had dried against his skin. He was 32 years old, and he felt like he had lived 1,000 lifetimes. Behind him, the remaining soldiers of the human expeditionary force were setting up camp. They were few now, less than 200 from the original 5,000. But they had won. The Vethara had called for help across the stars when the Krath invaded their world. The Krath were monsters, pure and simple. They were a race of hunters that moved from world to world, consuming everything in their path. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply killed and fed and moved on to the next world. When the Vethari message reached Earth, most governments wanted to ignore it. The Vethari were strange. They had 4 arms and skin that changed color with their emotions. They lived for hundreds of years and spoke in songs. They were not like humans at all. But Marcus had been there when the message came. He had seen the recordings of the Krath attacks. He had watched families running through burning streets. He had seen children crying over the bodies of their parents. Marcus had volunteered that same day. He was a soldier, one of the best. He had fought in the water wars of 2087 and the rebellion on Mars. He knew how to fight and how to lead. When he spoke to the United Nations Council, he told them that today it was the Vethari, but tomorrow it could be Earth. The Krath would not stop with one world. They never did. The Council eventually agreed to send a small force. They called it a peacekeeping mission, but everyone knew it was a test. If humans could help save the Vethari, then humanity would have allies among the stars. If they failed, well, at least they would learn something about the enemy. Marcus remembered the day they arrived on Vethara Prime. The planet was beautiful in a way that Earth had not been for centuries. The skies were purple at dawn and gold at sunset. Great forests of crystal trees caught the light and filled the air with music. The oceans were warm and clear, and strange creatures swam beneath the waves. But the beauty was being destroyed. The Krath had already taken half the continent. Cities that had stood for 10,000 years were now ash and rubble. The Vethari were a peaceful people. They had not fought a war in over a millennium. They had weapons, but they did not know how to use them. They had soldiers, but they did not know how to fight. Queen Zyratha was the first Vethari Marcus ever met. She was tall, taller than any human, with silver skin that glowed faintly in the light. Her 4 arms moved with perfect grace, and her eyes were the color of deep space. When she spoke, her voice was like water flowing over stone. She was young for a queen, only 150 years old, but she carried the weight of her dying people on her shoulders. She did not trust humans at first. Why would she? Humans were strange creatures from a distant star. They were short-lived and violent. They had destroyed their own world and were now spreading across the galaxy like a disease. But Zyratha was desperate. Her people were dying. She would accept help from anyone, even creatures as strange as humans. Marcus worked with the Vethari generals to build a defense. It was not easy. The Vethari way of war was all wrong. They believed in honor and fair combat. They announced their attacks and gave their enemies time to prepare. They refused to strike at night or from hiding. Marcus had to change everything. He taught them about ambushes and traps. He showed them how to use the terrain to their advantage. He introduced them to weapons they had never seen before. Human weapons were crude compared to Vethari technology, but they were designed for one purpose: to kill. The Vethari had never needed such things. At first, the Vethari soldiers did not like Marcus. They thought his methods were dishonorable. But after the first victory, they began to listen. Marcus had led 50 Vethari warriors against a Krath patrol of 200. He had hidden his soldiers in the crystal forest and waited until the Krath passed beneath them. Then he had attacked from above, using the element of surprise to shatter the enemy formation. Not a single Vethari died that day. Word spread through the army. The human knew how to win. The human could teach them to survive. Slowly, the Vethari began to change. They learned to fight dirty. They learned to strike fast and retreat before the enemy could respond. They learned that sometimes honor meant nothing when your children were dying. Queen Zyratha watched all of this from her palace. She received reports every day about the human captain and his strange methods. At first, she was horrified. This was not how war was supposed to be fought, but as the victories piled up, her horror turned to curiosity. And slowly, her curiosity turned to something else. She began visiting the front lines. She said it was to inspire her troops, but the truth was that she wanted to see the human for herself. She wanted to understand how someone could be so violent and so gentle at the same time. Marcus treated his soldiers like family. He remembered their names and asked about their children. He mourned every death and celebrated every victory. He was a killer and a healer, a monster and a saint. The war lasted 3 years, 3 years of blood and fire and death. Marcus lost count of the battles. He lost count of the friends he buried. He lost count of the times he nearly died. But he never stopped fighting. Every time the darkness threatened to swallow him, he thought about the Vethari children he had seen playing in the crystal forests. He thought about their songs and their laughter. He would not let the Krath take that away. The final battle was the worst. The Krath had gathered their remaining forces for one last assault on the capital city. If the city fell, the Vethari would be finished. There would be nowhere left to run, no way to survive. Marcus had less than 3,000 soldiers against an enemy army of 50,000. The odds were impossible. But Marcus had a plan. He always had a plan. He sent most of his forces to defend the city walls. They were meant to hold the line as long as possible. Meanwhile, Marcus took 200 volunteers on a suicide mission behind enemy lines. Their target was the Krath Queen, the massive creature that controlled the hive mind of the entire army. If they could kill her, the Krath would become confused and disorganized. They would not be able to coordinate their attack. The journey through enemy territory took 3 days. They moved at night and hid during the day. They killed silently and left no trace. By the time they reached the Krath nest, Marcus had only 50 soldiers left. The rest had fallen along the way, buying time for the others to continue. The nest was a nightmare. It was built from the bones of the Vethari dead, piled high into a structure that stretched toward the sky. Inside, thousands of Krath warriors crawled over each other like insects. The queen was at the center, a massive creature the size of a building. Her body pulsed with dark energy, and her mind reached out to control every Krath on the planet. Marcus did not hesitate. He led his soldiers into the heart of the nest. They fought through waves of enemies using every trick and weapon they had. One by one, his soldiers fell. But they kept fighting. They kept pushing forward. In the end, Marcus stood alone before the queen. His armor was destroyed. His weapons were empty. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but he was still standing. He was still fighting. The queen looked at him with her 100 eyes. She had never seen a creature like this. The Vethari broke so easily. They surrendered when they lost hope. But this small creature, this human, did not know how to surrender. He did not know how to stop. Marcus pulled out his combat knife. It was the only weapon he had left. He looked at the massive creature before him and smiled. The queen attacked. Her claws slashed through the air fast enough to create sonic booms, but Marcus was faster. He dodged and weaved, using his small size to his advantage. He climbed up the queen's body, driving his knife into her flesh with every step. She screamed and thrashed, trying to shake him off, but he held on. Finally, Marcus reached her head. He looked into her central eye, the one that connected her to the hive mind. He raised his knife. The queen sent out a telepathic message to every Krath on the planet. Kill the human. Kill him now. But it was too late. Marcus brought the knife down. The blade pierced the queen's eye and sank deep into her brain. She screamed one final time and then she was silent. Across the planet, the Krath stopped. Their queen was dead. Their connection to the hive mind was severed. They did not know what to do. Some of them fled. Some of them simply stood there, waiting for orders that would never come. And the Vethari army, led by soldiers that Marcus had trained, cut them down without mercy. The war was over. Marcus stood on the cliff looking down at the valley below. He should have felt victorious. He should have felt proud, but all he felt was tired. So very, very tired. Behind him he heard footsteps. Light footsteps, barely touching the ground. He knew who it was before he turned around. Queen Zyratha stood a few meters away. Her silver skin glowed in the fading light. Her deep space eyes were fixed on him. She had come alone without guards or advisors, just her. Marcus bowed his head. In HFY culture, you did not look directly at the queen unless she gave you permission. He had learned that lesson early. Xyratha spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. She said that she had watched him for 3 years. She had seen him fight and bleed and sacrifice everything for people that were not his own. She had seen him teach her soldiers how to survive. She had seen him mourn every death as if it were a member of his own family. She asked him why. Why did he care so much about people he had never met? Why did he risk his life for a world that was not his home? Marcus did not answer right away. He thought about the question for a long moment. Then he looked up, meeting the queen's eyes for the first time. He told her that it was the right thing to do. He told her that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. He told her that he had seen too much suffering in his life to walk away from people who needed help. He told her that humans were not perfect. They made mistakes. They hurt each other. But they also knew how to love. They knew how to sacrifice. They knew how to stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves. Xyratha listened to every word. Her skin shifted through a dozen colors, showing emotions that Marcus could not name. When he finished speaking, she was silent for a long time. Then she did something that shocked him. She knelt down until they were at eye level. She took his hands in 2 of hers, and she asked him a question that would change his life forever. She asked him to marry her. Marcus stared at the queen. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. The blood loss must have affected his brain. There was no way she had just said what he thought she said. But Xyratha's expression did not change. Her deep space eyes held his gaze without blinking. Her hands were warm against his skin, a gentle pressure that felt more real than anything else in the universe. He asked her to repeat what she had said. Xyratha smiled. It was a small smile, but it transformed her face completely. She told him that she was asking him to become her king. She was asking him to stay on HFY Prime and rule beside her. She was asking him to be her partner for the rest of his short human life. Marcus pulled his hands away and took a step back. He shook his head. This was wrong. This was impossible. He was a soldier, not a king. He was a human, not a HFY. He did not belong here. Xyratha stood up slowly. Her skin turned a pale blue, a color that Marcus had learned meant sadness. She told him that she understood his confusion. She told him that she had struggled with these feelings for a long time. But watching him fight, watching him sacrifice, watching him care for her people as if they were his own, she had fallen in love with him. She could not explain it any better than that. Marcus turned away. He looked out at the valley below at the smoke still rising from the battlefield. He thought about everything he had lost in this war, his friends, his soldiers, his innocence. He thought about everything he had seen, the death, the destruction, the endless suffering. He told her that he was not a good man. He had killed hundreds, maybe thousands during this war. He had blood on his hands that would never wash off. He had done terrible things in the name of victory. A queen like her deserved someone better, someone pure, someone worthy. Xyratha walked up behind him. She placed one of her hands on his shoulder. Her touch was light, almost hesitant. She told him that she did not want someone pure. She did not want someone who had never seen darkness. She wanted someone who had looked into the abyss and chosen to fight anyway. She wanted someone who understood the true cost of peace. Marcus closed his eyes. He thought about Earth. He had not seen his home planet in over 3 years. He had a sister there somewhere, probably thinking he was dead. He had a life there once upon a time. Friends and dreams and plans for the future. But that life felt like a distant memory now. The war had changed him. He was not the same person who had left Earth all those years ago. He did not know if he could ever go back to being that person again. He asked her what would happen to the alliance between Earth and HFY Prime. He asked her what her people would think about their queen marrying an alien. He asked her a dozen practical questions, trying to find a reason to say no. Xyratha answered each question patiently. She told him that the alliance would be strengthened by their union. Humans and HFY would become true partners, bound together by marriage as well as treaty. Her people would accept him because she loved him, and because he had saved them all. The Council of Elders might object at first, but they would come around eventually. Love was valued above all things in HFY culture. Marcus ran out of questions. He stood there in silence, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to run away. Part of him wanted to accept. Part of him did not know what he wanted at all. He asked her for time. He needed to think about this. He needed to process everything that had happened. The war had just ended a few hours ago. He was not in the right state of mind to make a decision this important. Xyratha nodded. She told him that he could take all the time he needed. She would wait for his answer, whether it took days or weeks or months. She had already waited 3 years. She could wait a little longer. She turned and walked away, her footsteps silent on the rocky ground. Marcus watched her go until she disappeared into the darkness. Then he sat down on the edge of the cliff and stared up at the unfamiliar stars. The next few days were strange. Marcus helped coordinate the cleanup efforts, making sure the remaining Krath were eliminated and the dead were properly buried. He worked alongside Vethari soldiers who now looked at him with something like reverence. They called him the Queen's Champion, the Savior of Worlds, the human who killed the darkness. He did not like the titles. He was just a soldier who had done his job, but the Vethari did not see it that way. To them, he was a legend. Children followed him through the streets, asking him to tell stories about his battles. Old veterans clasped his hands and wept, thanking him for giving them a future. Marcus did not know how to handle the attention. On Earth, soldiers were respected but not worshipped. They were ordinary people who had chosen an extraordinary job, but here on Vethara Prime, he was treated like a god. He visited the memorial for the fallen soldiers. Thousands of names were carved into the crystal walls, both Vethara and human. Marcus stood there for hours, reading each name and remembering the faces behind them. So many had died. So many would never see their homes again. He found his own soldiers' names near the bottom of one wall: Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Sergeant James Okonkwo, Private Maria Santos. He had served with them since the beginning. He had trained with them, fought with them, laughed with them, and now they were just names on a wall. Marcus reached out and touched the crystal. It was warm beneath his fingers, heated by some internal energy source. The Vethari believed that the dead lived on in the crystal, their spirits preserved forever in the beautiful stone. Marcus did not know if he believed that, but he hoped it was true. A voice spoke behind him. It was soft and melodic, not Xyratha's voice but similar. Marcus turned to find a young Vethari woman watching him. Her skin was pale gold and her eyes were bright green. She introduced herself as Kyra, the Queen's younger sister. Kyra told him that she had come to deliver a message. The Council of Elders wanted to meet with him. They wanted to discuss the Queen's proposal. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had been avoiding this conversation. He had been hoping that somehow the whole thing would just go away, but he knew that was impossible. Xyratha had made her intentions clear, and now her government wanted answers. He followed Kyra through the city streets to the great hall where the council met. The building was ancient, one of the few structures that had survived the war without damage. Its walls were made of that same crystal material, carved with images of Vethari history going back thousands of years. Inside, 12 elder Vethari sat in a semicircle, their faces stern and unreadable. Xyratha sat at the center, her silver skin glowing softly in the dim light. She did not look at Marcus as he entered. Her expression was carefully neutral. The eldest council member spoke first. He was incredibly old, his skin turned almost white with age. He asked Marcus directly, did he intend to accept the Queen's proposal? Marcus took a deep breath. He had thought about this moment many times over the past few days. He had considered every argument for and against. He had weighed the political implications, the cultural differences, the practical challenges. He had examined his own feelings from every angle. And in the end, he had made his decision. He told the council that he loved their queen. He said it simply, without decoration or explanation. He told them that he had not planned for this to happen. He had not come to their world looking for love, but somewhere along the way, watching Xyratha lead her people with courage and grace, his heart had decided for him. He told them that he understood their concerns. He was an alien. He was short-lived compared to them. He came from a violent species with a troubled history. He was not what they had expected for their queen's consort. But he promised them that he would spend every day of his remaining life trying to be worthy of her. He would learn their customs and respect their traditions. He would serve their people as faithfully as he had served his own soldiers. He would be the best partner he could be, for however long he had. The council members exchanged glances. They had expected him to refuse. They had expected him to make excuses or bargain for political advantage. They had not expected sincerity. Xyratha finally looked at him. Her deep space eyes were filled with emotion that Marcus could not quite name. Her skin shifted through colors faster than he could follow. She was trying to stay composed, but her feelings were written across her body in that uniquely Vethara way. The eldest council member spoke again. He said that the council would discuss the matter and render their decision within 3 days. In the meantime, Marcus was to be treated as an honored guest. Marcus bowed and left the great hall. His heart was pounding. He had said what he felt, and now his fate was in the hands of strangers. 3 days passed slowly. Marcus tried to keep busy, helping with reconstruction efforts and meeting with the human survivors. There were only 163 of them left, out of the original 5,000. They were all changed by the war, all carrying invisible scars. Some of them asked about the Queen's proposal. Word had spread quickly through the camp. Marcus told them the truth. He had accepted, but the council still needed to approve. He asked them what they thought. The responses were mixed. Some soldiers were happy for him. They had seen the way he and the Queen looked at each other. They believed in love, even impossible love. Others were more cautious. They worried about politics and alliances. They wondered what would happen to the human-Vethara relationship if the marriage failed. One soldier, a young woman named Private Anderson, gave him advice that stuck with him. She told him that life was short, even for humans. She said that if he had found something real, something that mattered, he should hold onto it with both hands. The future was never guaranteed. The only thing you could count on was the present moment. Marcus thought about her words a lot over those 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Kyra came to his quarters with a message. The council had made their decision. They wanted to see him immediately. Marcus followed her back to the great hall. His stomach was full of butterflies. He tried to read Kyra's expression, but her face gave nothing away. She walked in silence, her 4 arms folded against her body. The council was already assembled when he arrived. Xyratha was there as well, sitting in her usual place. This time, she was watching him as he entered. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. The eldest council member stood. He was holding a small crystal object in his hands, something that pulsed with inner light. He told Marcus that the council had deliberated long and carefully. They had considered every aspect of the Queen's proposal. He paused, and the silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Then he smiled. He told Marcus that the council had unanimously approved the marriage. They recognized his service to the Vethari people. They honored his sacrifice and his courage. They believed that his union with the Queen would bring great benefit to both their species. The crystal object in his hands was a betrothal stone, a traditional symbol of Vethari engagement. He asked Marcus to accept it. Marcus walked forward slowly. His hands were shaking as he reached out and took the stone. It was warm against his palm, pulsing with a gentle rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He looked at Xyratha. She was crying, silver tears rolling down her cheeks. Her skin was cycling through every color of the rainbow. She had never looked more beautiful. Marcus walked over to her and knelt down. He presented the stone to her, following the ritual that Kyra had secretly taught him the day before. He spoke the traditional words in the Vethari language, asking her to accept him as her partner for life. Xyratha took the stone and held it to her chest. She spoke her own vows, her voice breaking with emotion. She accepted him. She loved him. She wanted to spend every moment of her life with him. The council members broke into applause. It was a sound Marcus had never heard before, the gentle clapping of 8 hands per person creating a rhythm like rain on crystal leaves. The great hall was filled with music. Marcus stood and took Xyratha's hands. He looked into her deep space eyes and saw his future reflected there. It was not the future he had planned. It was not the life he had expected. But it was real and it was good, and he would not trade it for anything. They were married 3 weeks later. The wedding was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It lasted for 7 days, with different ceremonies and celebrations scheduled from dawn until midnight. The entire planet seemed to be involved, with billions of Vethari watching the events through their version of television. Marcus did his best to follow all the rituals correctly. There was the ceremony of stars, where the couple stood beneath the night sky and made promises to the universe. There was the ceremony of waters, where they bathed in a sacred pool and emerged reborn as partners. There was the ceremony of songs, where they composed original music together and performed it for their families. The music part was the hardest. Vethari songs were complex, with harmonies that human vocal cords could barely produce. Marcus practiced for hours every day, trying to get the notes right. Ziratha was patient with him, guiding him through the difficult passages and laughing when he made mistakes. He loved her laugh. It was like bells ringing in a crystal cave, high and clear and full of joy. He wanted to spend the rest of his life making her laugh. The human survivors attended the wedding as honored guests. They wore their best uniforms, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. Some of them had formed friendships with Vethari soldiers during the war, and those relationships were now deepening into something more. Marcus was glad. The universe needed more connections between species. Earth sent a delegation as well. Government officials and diplomats who had never set foot on Vethara Prime before now walked through its streets with wide eyes and open mouths. They brought gifts from the human nations, works of art, samples of Earth technology, recordings of music and literature. The Vethari received everything with gracious appreciation. The final ceremony, the binding, took place at sunset on the 7th day. Marcus and Ziratha stood on a platform overlooking the capital city. Millions of Vethari had gathered below, their colorful skins creating a living mosaic that stretched to the horizon. The eldest council member performed the binding ritual. He wrapped a cord of woven crystal around their joined hands, symbolizing the connection between their souls. He spoke ancient words in a dialect that even Ziratha barely understood, calling upon the ancestors to bless this union. Then it was done. They were married. The crowd erupted in celebration. Fireworks exploded across the sky, painting the clouds in brilliant colors. Music filled the air from every direction. People danced and sang and embraced each other. Marcus looked at his wife. The word still felt strange in his mind. Ziratha looked back at him, her deep space eyes shining with happiness. She reached up with one of her hands and touched his face. She told him that she loved him. He told her that he loved her too. They kissed as the fireworks continued overhead. It was their first kiss as husband and wife, and it was perfect. The following months were an adjustment period for everyone. Marcus had to learn how to be a king, which was very different from being a soldier. He attended meetings with the council, listened to reports about the reconstruction efforts, and made decisions that affected millions of lives. It was overwhelming at first. But Ziratha was always there to help him. She explained the complexities of Vethari politics, introduced him to the important people he needed to know, and defended him against those who questioned his authority. She was his partner in every sense of the word. The relationship between humans and Vethari grew stronger. Trade agreements were signed, allowing goods and technology to flow between the two worlds. Cultural exchange programs were established, sending artists and scholars back and forth. Military cooperation increased, with human and Vethari forces training together to face any future threats. Not everyone was happy about the changes. Some Vethari traditionalists believed that their queen had made a mistake by marrying an alien. They whispered in dark corners, plotting ways to undermine Marcus's authority. Some human politicians were unhappy too, worried that the marriage gave the Vethari too much influence over Earth's affairs. Marcus dealt with the critics as best he could. He was patient and diplomatic, trying to understand their concerns and address them fairly. He did not always succeed. There were arguments and conflicts, moments when he wanted to give up and walk away. But he had made a commitment, and he intended to keep it. 1 year after the wedding, Ziratha gave him news that changed everything. She was pregnant. The announcement stunned the galaxy. No one had known if human Vethari reproduction was even possible. The genetic differences between the species were significant. Scientists had theorized that hybrid children might be possible, but there was no certainty. Now there was proof. The pregnancy was difficult. Vethari carried their children for 18 months, much longer than human pregnancies. Zyratha was sick constantly during the first few months, her body struggling to adapt to the hybrid child growing inside her. Marcus stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand during the bad moments and celebrating with her during the good ones. Doctors from both species monitored the pregnancy closely. They took blood samples and ran tests, trying to understand what was happening inside Zyratha's body. The results were fascinating. The child seemed to be developing characteristics from both parents, creating something entirely new. News of the pregnancy spread across the galaxy. Some reacted with joy, seeing it as a symbol of unity between species. Others reacted with fear, worried about what this hybrid child might mean for the future. A few extremists called for the pregnancy to be terminated, claiming that the child would be an abomination. Marcus ignored the critics. He focused on his wife and his unborn child. Nothing else mattered. 9 months into the pregnancy, something went wrong. Zyratha collapsed during a routine meeting with the council. Her skin turned pale gray, a color that Marcus had never seen before. The doctors rushed her to the medical facility, their faces tight with worry. Marcus waited outside the treatment room for hours. He paced back and forth, unable to sit still. Every minute felt like an eternity. He prayed to every god he had ever heard of, begging them to save his wife and child. Finally, the lead doctor came out to speak with him. She was an elderly Vethari woman with centuries of experience. Her expression was serious. She told Marcus that Zyratha's body was having trouble supporting the pregnancy. The hybrid child required nutrients that were difficult for a Vethari mother to produce. Without intervention, both mother and child would die. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. He grabbed the doctor's arm to steady himself. He asked what could be done. The doctor explained that they needed to perform a procedure that was risky but potentially life-saving. They would need to transfer some of Marcus's blood directly to Zyratha, using human cells to provide the nutrients the child needed. It was experimental and dangerous, but it was the only option. Marcus did not hesitate. He told them to do it. The procedure took hours. Marcus lay on a bed next to his wife, connected to her by a complex network of tubes and machines. His blood flowed into her body, carrying the human elements that the child needed to survive. It was painful and exhausting, but he did not complain. When it was over, the doctors ran their tests again. The results were miraculous. The child's vital signs had stabilized. Zyratha's color was returning to normal. The crisis had passed. Marcus held his wife's hand and wept with relief. The remaining months of the pregnancy passed without incident. Zyratha grew larger and more beautiful, her body adapting to the unique child she carried. Marcus stayed close to her at all times, unwilling to let her out of his sight. The birth happened on a warm night 18 months after conception. Zyratha was surrounded by doctors and family members, all of them waiting anxiously for the arrival of the first human Vethari child in history. The delivery was long and difficult, but Zyratha was strong. She pushed and screamed and fought, refusing to give up. Marcus held her hand through all of it, whispering encouragements and promises. And then finally, a new voice filled the room. The baby was beautiful. She had her mother's silver skin, but with patterns of pale pink that came from her father's side. She had 4 arms like a Vethari, but smaller and more delicate. Her eyes were the color of deep space, just like her mother's, but with flecks of human blue scattered throughout. They named her Alara, after the ancient Vethari goddess of new beginnings. Marcus held his daughter for the first time and felt something break open inside his chest. He had killed so many. He had destroyed so much. But now, looking at this tiny, perfect creature, he understood what it was all for. This was why he had fought. This was why he had survived. Zyratha watched him with tears streaming down her face. She told him that he was a wonderful father already. Marcus leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. Then he kissed his wife. His family, his world, his everything. 5 years passed like water flowing through a river. Alara grew from a baby into a curious, energetic child who combined the best qualities of both her parents. She had her mother's grace and her father's stubbornness. She loved to explore the crystal forests near the palace, asking questions about every plant and creature she encountered. She wanted to know everything about everything. Marcus watched her grow with pride and wonder. He had never imagined himself as a father. His life before the war had been focused on duty and service, with no room for family. But now, playing with his daughter in the gardens or reading her stories at bedtime, he understood what he had been missing. Ziratha ruled Vethara Prime with wisdom and compassion. The reconstruction efforts were mostly complete now, with cities rebuilt and populations stabilized. The scars of the Krath War were healing slowly, both on the land and in people's hearts. The Vethari looked to their queen with love and respect. Marcus supported his wife in every way he could. He learned the intricacies of Vethari government, offering advice when asked and staying silent when it was not his place to speak. He found a balance between his role as king consort and his identity as a human soldier. It was not always easy, but he made it work. The relationship between Earth and Vethara Prime continued to strengthen. Trade flourished, making both civilizations richer and more prosperous. Scientific cooperation led to breakthroughs in medicine, energy production, and space travel. Military alliances kept both worlds safe from external threats. Other alien species began to take notice. The galaxy was vast, filled with thousands of civilizations at different stages of development. Some were friendly, some were hostile, most were indifferent. But the partnership between humans and Vethari showed that cooperation was possible, even between very different peoples. Marcus became something of an ambassador for humanity. He traveled to distant worlds, meeting with alien leaders and explaining human culture. He found that his reputation preceded him wherever he went. The human who killed the darkness, the savior of Vethara Prime, the man who married a queen. He did not like the titles, but he used them when they helped him achieve his goals. Peace was more important than personal comfort. One day, a message arrived from deep space. It was encoded in a frequency that no one had seen before, using a language that no one recognized. The Vethari scientists worked for weeks to decode it, finally producing a translation that sent shockwaves through the government. The message was from the Krath. Not all of them had died when Marcus killed the queen. Small groups had escaped Vethara Prime, fleeing into the darkness between stars. They had spent years rebuilding their numbers, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Now they were ready. The message was simple: surrender or die. Marcus read the translation with a cold feeling in his stomach. He had hoped the Krath were finished. He had hoped his daughter would never know the horror of war. But hope was not enough in a hostile universe. He called an emergency meeting with the council. The elders were frightened, their memories of the war still fresh despite the years of peace. They argued about how to respond. Some wanted to negotiate, some wanted to surrender. A few wanted to fight, but they were outnumbered. Marcus listened to the debate without speaking. He was thinking about his daughter, about the life he had built here. He was thinking about all the people who would die if war came again. He was thinking about the promises he had made on his wedding day. Finally, Ziratha asked for his opinion. Marcus stood and faced the council. He told them that negotiation was impossible. The Krath did not negotiate. They consumed. He told them that surrender was equally impossible. The Krath would not accept surrender. They would destroy everything anyway. That left only one option. They had to fight. The council erupted in protest. They demanded to know how they could possibly win. The Krath had been nearly unstoppable before. Now, with years to rebuild, they would be even stronger. The Vethari military had grown soft during peacetime. They were not ready for another war. Marcus told them that he understood their fear. He shared it, but fear was not a reason to give up. Fear was a reason to prepare. He outlined a plan that he had been developing secretly for years. He had never forgotten about the surviving Krath. He had always known they would return someday, so he had been preparing. The plan called for a coalition, humans and Vethari fighting together as they had before. But this time, they would not be alone. Marcus had spent years building relationships with other alien civilizations. Some of them owed debts to humanity. Some of them had their own reasons to hate the Krath. If he could bring them together, they might have a chance. The council was skeptical, but they agreed to try. They had no better options. Marcus left Vethara Prime the next day, traveling to a dozen different worlds in as many weeks. He met with leaders and generals, diplomats and warriors. He called in favors and made new promises. He argued and persuaded and sometimes begged. In the end, he succeeded. 7 civilizations agreed to join the coalition against the Krath. It was the largest military alliance in galactic history. The war began 3 months later. It was different from the first war. Marcus was no longer a young captain leading small teams on dangerous missions. He was a strategist now, directing massive fleets and coordinating attacks across multiple star systems. He spent his days in command centers, staring at holographic maps and making decisions that affected millions of lives. Xyratha stayed on Vethara Prime, protecting their daughter and managing the home front. They spoke every night through quantum communication, sharing their fears and hopes across the vast distances between them. Their love had grown deeper over the years, strengthened by challenges and time. Alara understood that her father was fighting to keep her safe. She drew pictures of him standing against the darkness, protecting their family with his courage. She hung the pictures on her bedroom wall and looked at them every night before she went to sleep. The coalition won its first major victory at the Battle of Xenos Prime. A massive Krath fleet had attempted to attack a civilian world, only to be met by combined human, Vethara, and allied forces. The fighting lasted for 3 days, but in the end, the Krath were destroyed. More victories followed. The coalition learned to work together, combining the strengths of different species into a fighting force greater than any individual civilization could field. Humans brought their tactical creativity and stubborn determination. Vethara contributed advanced technology and strategic wisdom. Other species added their own unique abilities. But the Krath adapted too. They learned from their defeats. They developed new weapons and new tactics. The war settled into a bloody stalemate, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory. Marcus knew that something had to change. The coalition could not sustain this level of warfare indefinitely. Morale was dropping. Resources were running low. If the stalemate continued, they would eventually lose. He needed to find the new Krath Queen. The Krath had rebuilt their hive mind around a new central intelligence. Without the Queen, their coordination would fail, just as it had in the First War. But finding her was nearly impossible. The Krath protected her location with layers of deception and defense. Marcus put together a team of the best operatives from every coalition species. They spent months gathering intelligence, following trails that often led nowhere. The Queen moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be tracked. Finally, they found her. She was hidden in a dead star system, surrounded by the largest Krath fleet ever assembled. Getting to her would require passing through defenses that seemed impenetrable. Marcus volunteered to lead the mission himself. Xyratha objected. She reminded him that he was too valuable, too important. The coalition needed him alive. Their daughter needed her father. Marcus told her that he understood, but some missions required a personal touch. Some enemies needed to see that their opponents were willing to sacrifice everything for victory. He had killed the last queen. He would kill this one too. Xyratha knew she could not stop him. She had fallen in love with a man who would always put duty before self-preservation. It was his greatest strength and his most frustrating quality. She made him promise to come home. He promised. The assault on the Queen's stronghold was the most dangerous mission of Marcus's life. His team fought through layer after layer of Krath defenders, losing members at every step. The darkness between stars seemed to reach out for them, trying to drag them down into oblivion. But they kept going, they kept fighting. Marcus reached the Queen's chamber with only 3 companions left. The Queen was massive, even larger than her predecessor. Her body filled the entire room, pulsing with dark energy, her 100 eyes fixed on Marcus as he entered. She spoke directly into his mind. She told him that she remembered him. The collective memory of the Krath included the moment of her mother's death. She had been waiting for this encounter for years. She would enjoy killing him slowly. Marcus raised his weapon. It was a prototype developed by Vethara scientists, designed specifically to disrupt the Queen's nervous system. He had one shot. The Queen attacked. The battle was brief but brutal. Marcus's companions died within seconds, torn apart by the Queen's claws. Marcus himself was wounded, a deep gash across his chest that sent blood spraying across the floor. But he did not stop. He could not stop. He fired the weapon. The Queen screamed. The energy pulse hit her central nervous cluster, disrupting the connections that linked her to the hive mind. She thrashed and convulsed, her massive body slamming against the walls. But she did not die. Marcus realized with horror that the weapon had not been strong enough. The Queen was weakened but still alive, still dangerous, still connected to her army. He had failed. The Queen recovered slowly, her 100 eyes focused on Marcus with murderous rage. She told him that he would suffer for what he had done. She would keep him alive for centuries, feeding on his pain. Marcus looked around the room. His weapon was empty. His companions were dead. He was bleeding out on the floor. There was nothing left. Nothing except his combat knife. The same knife that had killed the first Queen. Marcus pulled the blade from his boot and forced himself to stand. His legs wobbled beneath him. His vision was blurring from blood loss, but he was still alive, still fighting. The Queen laughed in his mind. She asked what he thought he could accomplish with such a primitive weapon. Marcus smiled. He had learned something important during his years on Vethara Prime. The Vethari were experts in energy manipulation. Their technology was based on redirecting and focusing different types of power. Zaratha had taught him some of their techniques, in case he ever needed them. He concentrated on the wound in his chest. He focused on the pain, channeling it into something else, something powerful. The knife in his hand began to glow. Human determination, Vethari technique, combined into something new. Marcus threw the knife. It flew through the air like a comet trailing golden light. The Queen tried to dodge, but she was too slow. The blade struck her directly in the central eye, driving deep into her brain. This time she died. Across the galaxy, the Krath forces froze. Their connection to the hive mind had been severed. Their Queen was dead. They were alone. The coalition forces attacked without mercy. Within hours, the war was over. Marcus woke up in a hospital bed on Vethara Prime. He had no memory of how he got there. The last thing he remembered was the Queen's body falling to the floor. Zaratha was sitting beside him, holding his hand. Her silver skin was pale with worry, but her deep space eyes lit up when she saw him open his eyes. She told him that he had been unconscious for 3 weeks. The doctors had not been sure he would survive. Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Zaratha gave him water, holding the cup to his lips while he drank. He asked about the war. She told him that it was over. The Krath were defeated, scattered across the galaxy in small groups that posed no threat. The coalition had won. He asked about the casualties. She told him the numbers. They were smaller than he had feared. The coalition's strategy had worked. They had won the war with fewer losses than the first conflict. He asked about their daughter. Zaratha smiled. She told him that Alara was fine. She was waiting outside, eager to see her father, but the doctors wanted to check him first. Marcus closed his eyes. Relief washed over him in waves. He had kept his promise. He had come home. The recovery took months. Marcus's wounds were severe, requiring multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. He was patient through all of it, focusing on getting better so he could return to his family. Alara visited him every day. She told him stories about her life, about school and friends and adventures in the Crystal Forest. She showed him new drawings, including one of him killing the Krath Queen. In the drawing, he was 10 feet tall and surrounded by golden light. Marcus laughed and told her that the drawing was very accurate. As Marcus healed, the galaxy changed around him. The coalition that had formed to fight the Krath did not dissolve after the war. Instead, it evolved into something new, a federation of civilizations committed to mutual defense and cooperation. Ambassadors from 7 species met regularly to discuss shared concerns and coordinate policies. Marcus was asked to serve as the Federation's first chairman. It was a ceremonial position mostly, meant to honor his role in bringing the alliance together. He accepted reluctantly, preferring to spend his time with his family rather than in political meetings. But he understood that his presence was important. The galaxy needed symbols, the galaxy needed hope, and for better or worse he had become both. Xyratha supported him in his new role, just as she had supported him through everything else. Their partnership was stronger than ever, forged in the fires of war and tempered by years of peace. They balanced each other perfectly, his passion and her wisdom, his action and her patience. Alara grew from a child into a young woman. She had inherited the best qualities of both her parents, combining human creativity with Vethari grace. She was curious and kind, fierce and gentle. She loved both of her cultures equally, moving between them with effortless ease. When she was 18, she asked her father to teach her how to fight. Marcus was surprised by the request. Alara had never shown much interest in warfare before. She preferred books to weapons, diplomacy to combat. But she explained her reasoning. She told him that peace was precious because it was fragile. Someone had to be ready to defend it when threats emerged. She wanted to be that someone. Marcus understood. He had felt the same way at her age. He began training her in the ways of human combat. He taught her about strategy and tactics, about weapons and hand-to-hand fighting. He shared the lessons he had learned over decades of warfare, both the techniques and the principles behind them. Xyratha taught her the Vethari arts as well: energy manipulation, mental discipline, the songs that could heal wounds and strengthen resolve. Alara absorbed it all, creating her own unique style that blended both traditions. She became formidable. When Alara was 25, she joined the Federation military. She rose quickly through the ranks, earning respect from soldiers of every species. Her unique heritage gave her advantages that no one else possessed. She could think like a human and fight like a Vethari, or vice versa, depending on what the situation required. Marcus watched her career with pride and concern. He knew the dangers she faced. He had faced them himself many times, but he also knew that he could not protect her forever. She had to find her own path, make her own choices. Xyratha felt the same way. They discussed their daughter often, sharing their worries and hopes. It helped to have a partner who understood, who carried the same burdens. The years continued to pass. Marcus grew old. His hair turned gray, then white. His body slowed down, no longer capable of the feats it had performed in his youth. He walked with a cane now, his knees damaged by decades of combat. But his mind remained sharp. He continued to serve as chairman of the Federation, offering guidance and wisdom to younger leaders. His experience was invaluable. He had seen the worst of war and the best of peace. He understood what was at stake when civilizations made their choices. Xyratha did not age as visibly. The Vethari lived for centuries, and she was still relatively young by their standards. But Marcus could see subtle changes in her over the years, a slight weariness in her movements, a depth in her eyes that spoke of accumulated sorrow. They never discussed the obvious. Marcus would die long before she did. It was the price of their love, the shadow that hung over their relationship, but they chose not to dwell on it. They focused instead on the time they had, making every moment count. On Marcus's 70th birthday, his family gathered for a celebration. His surviving soldiers from the original expedition came, old men and women now, their service medals shining on their chests. His adopted Vethari family came, council members and servants who had become friends over the decades. Alara came, resplendent in her military uniform, with a promotion ceremony scheduled for the next day. Marcus looked around at the faces of the people he loved. He thought about everything that had brought him to this moment. The war, the queen, the marriage, the child, the second war, the peace. He thought about the scared young captain who had landed on Vethara Prime 38 years ago. That man had expected to die. He had not expected to find love. He had not expected to find family. He had not expected to find a home. But he had found all of those things and more. Xyratha came to stand beside him. She took his hand in two of hers, the familiar gesture that had comforted him through decades of joy and sorrow. She asked him what he was thinking about. Marcus told her the truth. He was thinking about how lucky he was. He was thinking about how grateful he felt. He was thinking about how much he loved her. Xyratha's skin shifted to a deep gold color, the shade that indicated profound happiness. She told him that she felt the same way. She told him that meeting him had been the best thing that ever happened to her. She told him that she would love him forever, long after he was gone. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. Ilara approached her parents. She had been watching them from across the room, seeing the love that had sustained their relationship for nearly 4 decades. She hoped to find something like that someday, someone who would stand beside her through anything. She hugged her father carefully, aware of his fragile bones. She told him happy birthday. She told him that she was proud to be his daughter. Marcus hugged her back. He told her that he was proud of her too, more proud than he could ever express. The celebration continued late into the night. There was music and food and laughter. Stories were told about Marcus's adventures, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. Old soldiers wept and embraced. Young people listened with wide eyes, learning about history from those who had lived it. Marcus sat in a comfortable chair near the center of the room, watching it all unfold. He was tired. His body ached, but his heart was full. He had saved a species from extinction. He had married a queen. He had raised a daughter who would carry on his legacy. He had helped build a federation that might last for centuries. Not bad for a simple soldier from Earth. Xyratha sat down beside him. She rested her head against his shoulder. They watched their guests together, content to simply be with each other. She asked him if he had any regrets. Marcus thought about the question. He thought about all the choices he had made, all the paths he had taken and not taken. He thought about the lives he had saved and the lives he had ended. He told her that he had one regret. She looked at him with concern. He smiled and said that his only regret was that he could not live long enough to spend eternity with her. Xyratha's eyes filled with silver tears. She kissed him gently on the lips. She told him that eternity was not necessary. They had this moment. They had their memories. They had their daughter who would carry pieces of both of them into the future. That was enough. That was everything. Marcus Cole, human warrior, king consort of Ithara Prime, chairman of the Galactic Federation, father and husband and soldier, closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He was home. He was loved. He was at peace. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.